Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, we discussed a lot about relationships in the last couple episodes, about how to recognize that sometimes my mechanism of detecting when something went wrong could be off. And saying that, as a result, what ended up being a relationship that shouldn't have been in, I wasn't able to detect. And because I took these imperfect measurements that my mind gave me, things didn't work out. And that was kind of what we talked about in the last two episodes or so. And what I've been talking about going out into the world, trying to take the message of Father and Joe with me, which ultimately I believe is a continuation of what we're called to do each Sunday in Mass. I am experiencing teaching people how to make better cultures in their businesses, that despite the fact that the basis of the values I'm instilling in my company and trying to put into the rest of the world are literally the virtues we've talked about: courage, justice, prudence, and humility. Those are the four I focus on. Despite the fact that they've existed for every person on this planet's lifetime, there is massive amount of reluctancy to try to instill those values and a combination of human nature into our general workplace sales. And I see this across the platforms. It doesn't matter. There's one industry that's cool with it and the other ones that aren't. And essentially what I'm running into is something that I cannot stand, but something I'm hoping you can help teach me overcome and maybe figure out, which is the sentence is, well, this is how we always used to do it, so this is how we're going to keep doing it, despite the fact that it's not working. So, Father, that is, most people would rather stay in a state of problem town than go through an experience that could change that. And that is something that's true to the human element for all of us. And I wanted to really kind of spend some time digging into that, because in a lot of ways, when I see people push against why should you be a Catholic, why should you be involved in a religion, this is the true impetus behind the argument about not wanting to change and become better. This is how I've always done it. I'm alive, so therefore I'm good enough. And that is the essence that is also by default has to be part of human nature, because it's ingrained everywhere I look. So I want to talk about that, Father, and see how we can figure out how to overcome that core problem, but obviously specific in the context of Father and Joe here, about talking about how to be open to relationships and ultimately love.
Well, I think there are a couple of different things going on there, Joe, and I'm going to say just a little bit and let you iterate on that, because I think you might have some different directions in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But just one thing that came to mind as you were speaking is a little wisdom from my high school soccer coach, who said, "Practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Good practice makes perfect." And I would say that if to keep doing what we've been doing is not necessarily a bad thing if what we've been doing is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
True.
it's not inherently problematic. And I also, and I don't remember the details well enough now, but I remember Jordan Peterson. I think Jonathan Haidt kind of gets at this too. Is there are some personality qualities that so in the big five, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeability, and neuroticism, that openness maybe versus conscientiousness tend to be the sort of open to new things, and that's a personality trait. And then someone can also be conscientious in the sense of responsibility. That's not necessarily being closed to new things. Anyway, I think openness correlates highly with people being a member of like the Democratic as opposed to the Republican Party, or being a political liberal as opposed to a political conservative. And so there is a bit of personality trait that's involved there. And then if you understand it from that point of view, and this is the kind of things that guys like Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Haidt do, you recognize that there's actually a value in both, in the kind of conservative tendency to keep doing what we've been doing, and in the openness and creativity to go in a new direction. And what we really need is both.
Mhm.
And both is not necessarily going to be invested fully in the same person, but both could be spread out across two people. And in fact, if you look at something like the personality index, we're really like, okay, so I'm 80 on the openness scale, somebody else is 20 on the openness scale, and the combination of the two is a nice tension. So one person is really pushing forward into a new place, and another person is going, "Whoa, wait, what's going on? We don't always do, we do this a different way. This is the way we've been doing it." And that's a really fruitful conversation if it's done in collaboration and mutual trust and communion. And then we can really work together. And that would be ideally also what would happen. I would think, even in the political realm, we often criticize the United States for only having two parties because that's, well, limited in its own way. If those two parties were sort of like genuinely conservative and genuinely liberal, and then we elected more or less, whatever, 50-50 from each party, then that could make for a really fruitful Congress, Senate, et cetera, because one would be kind of pushing, the other would be kind of holding back, and ultimately there would be a discussion that allowed a kind of controlled growth to happen, not just radical change and not just stuffy resistance. And so I think that would be, kind of the ideal place for all of that. And then just one more thing to tie together some of the comments you made there at the beginning, and then I'll let you take this in whatever direction you want to. But you mentioned that those four virtues, and it's interesting. I like how you said that: courage, justice, prudence, and then you didn't say temperance. You said humility. And so the four traditional ones would be temperance, but humility is under temperance, and actually humility is not ancient. Aristotle did not list humility as one of those four virtues at all, even under temperance. So that's actually a Christian nuance. That's a
Hmm.
Christian development of the traditional kind of Greek formulation of the virtues, and and that does open some additional questions, like what is genuinely new in Christianity? Uh, what are the ways that, in fact, Christ is proposing something radically new, and that was a breakthrough 2,000 years ago, and also really living that out is still a breakthrough in many ways today. But we could say more about those points as well.
Yeah, well, I use humility because, like, it, not to get into my whole business context of it, but it's essential. In so many conversations, I think it's the only one of the four that requires balance, right? You can always work to become more courageous. You can always work to become smarter, which essentially what prudence is. You always become more just. But at the end of the day, humility is a balance. It's I'm not the most important, nor am I the least important. That there's a knowing your place and what this relationship is supposed to be. Um, and I not gonna lie, I kind of use humility because more people understand that word than temperance. To be blunt, it's a little bit of a cheating thing, but I also believe in the message of it is that you need to find the balance of where it is that's important. So it I guess I teach this in human contact or in my business context, but it applies to all people. It really is. Are you allowing a pathway for discovery? And this is where, in my mind, the courage and the humility come together because, on the one hand, you have to be willing to open yourself up that someone beneath you has a better idea. By definition, that takes courage instead of closing yourself off saying, I am the boss, I know everything, you all shut up. And then we don't want that. Courage is from a not necessarily a spiritual standpoint, but just from a business standpoint, requires that. Also, the humility that you can be wrong. And we look at that in so many people's relationships with life, it's off. So sorry for going a little bit different, but that was why I apply those into my practice. And I love your starting point there about why there's a need to have both sides, a need to have this is how we do it and keep doing it because most of the time, good practices survive. So therefore, we want to keep the good things going, but we also want to explore the other things. Where I guess I'm running into the problem, and this is in a lot of ways, is that so much, and I'm not saying at our element, but so much of our current society is not rooted in things that have had enough time to figure out what the right way is. So when we talk about, for instance, the way that the Mass was created, the Mass has been created over a 2,000-year period of scholarly, intense thought. How to deal with Twitter has been basically made up for 20 years when you look at the two in comparison. And that's what I'm trying to say in terms of just because this is how we used to do it and how we should do it, do not line up. And how should we as individuals figure out that line when so few of us are willing to dive in deep to ask why? And I guess this might have just become me just dropping 40 questions on you without giving you a chance to breathe for air. I'm sorry if that's the case, but that's kind of where it's where I'm at right now, Father.
So I understand the context of your question a little bit better. Thinking about the Twitter example of,
Mhm.
we've always done it this way constitutes, for less than half my lifetime, and
Mhm.
probably even shorter than that, like for the last year or something. This is not the venerable tradition that we are building on. That's in ancient wisdom and in human discovery. Um, so I guess I would say still as a basic thing, having both the kind of conservative approach of continuing to do something, because there can be a danger of abandoning things too quickly as well, that sometimes you have to do something that way a while. We don't get instant results. And we're probably in a time where there's more of a craving, clamoring for instant results than there has been at other times in history. And so, I think it's important to be careful about that danger of just trying to grab the instant gratification, the instant result. And sometimes we need to stick with some things for a little while. So there could be, again, a value to the conservative stance of let's keep doing this for a while until we really understand it. And then we can keep trying to innovate. And then likewise, there's always a need for further development and innovation. What's another way that we can use these things? I mean, I remember very much when Twitter came out, and I was kind of trying to figure out what the value of it was, and some of the at the very beginning, some of the sharing and hashtag sort of movement bits of it. I don't know. I don't think everything was in place from the outset, at least not in my mind. But we were still trying to figure out what can you do with this thing, and uh, and then certain patterns of use have developed, and patterns of use have a value also because we can only handle so many new things, so much new input, and it can be really overwhelming to, it's like I can I just shudder when I think about driving like in England. I mean, I don't know how I would handle that, driving on the other side of the street, because I would have to pay attention constantly. Whereas now
Mm.
when I'm driving, I'm hardly paying attention. I can really relegate so much of it to instinct, and I can really focus on other things. And obviously, if I'm going to take a left turn into traffic, that's going to be different than if I'm driving on a highway or something. But still, there's just so much that you can block out. Without thinking about it, I'm looking left, I'm looking right, I'm looking left, and then I'm turning. And to have all of that reoriented so that you'd have to constantly pay attention to what's going on, and am I supposed to look this way and then that way, and then what direction our car is going to come from, and do I pass on this side or that side, and to have to think about all of that again would be exhausting. And so there is a value to certain patterns of behavior and patterns of use and regular things, because then it frees us up from having to think about a lot of those things, and we can focus on the actual moments of creativity, the actual things that are new, that we're incorporating into a system of behavior, a system of thought. So there is just to observe the value in all of that, but um, then to break people out of that, I guess, like you said, there is a real importance. We do ask the question why these days, um, and people often want a reason why they should change or why they should do something, or the time when we just trusted authority because it was an authority. Those times are not these times,
Mm.
and so that's again, that can be irritating at some level because it forces us to actually put reasons to things that intuitively we know are true, and that's again a place where some people are more intuitive than other people, and some people are more rational or sort of explicit in their thinking than other people, and so being forced to put reasons to everything can kind of slow us down on the one hand. On the other hand, it's useful to come up with reasons for things, and it's part of what you and I are doing here on this podcast is trying to come
Yes.
up with and talk about the reasons for a lot of things. And so there can be there's a challenge there, but also a value in that expectation in our time.
Yeah, and it's remarkable about how this has come to pass. I mean, just kind of thinking in an abstract way, because part of what I do for this show is I read the Bible and try to place myself in it, and inevitably I get these thoughts and questions of like, when did things start changing? And I get that the argument is everything is more exponential than the generation before it, and to a degree that's true, but the compounding effect of exponentiality, just looking at it from a mathematical standpoint, is the further you get away, the less it seems like anything is changing, as it's back further away from us in time, further away from the point when the curve goes through the roof. And if you're on that point when the curve is going through the roof, there's so much change, relatively speaking, to the period before. And I sit here and think, what if we were having these kind of conversations in at the turn of the last century, instead of the 20, 30 year of this century? How different would it have been? Electricity is just starting. People are having indoor plumbing in bulk. Like this kind of stuff in the city of Pittsburgh. There were neighborhoods that didn't have indoor plumbing until after World War II. And I think about this kind of thing that we all take for granted. And quite frankly, you're talking about the age of instant gratification. I'm looking at the amount of the internet that I get coming through my door per second, and it's mind-boggling compared to what it was just a couple of years ago. Um, the concept of buffering does not exist in my life anymore, and basically, it was my life when I was in middle school. You wanted to play a game online, it was like, well, you better make sure no one else is doing anything. Um, and now I can play 500 games at the same time on my phone. And this is part of the essence of what I'm trying to get to, is that if you float around in this ether of change without being grounded in why you do things, it seems so easy to get lost. And it also seems why this is always a present day conversation, um, in terms of the span of human history. Because, yeah, eventually people figured out certain technologies that, eventually people figured out certain technologies that we have figured out now, like the internal combustion engine that came out. That was a complete revolutionary thing. You're telling me I don't need to ride a horse anymore. And now we kind of figured out, like, all right, this is how we can not only just make them safer, we can make them more efficient, and so on and so forth. And this is all technology standpoint conversation, but I think it's all applicable to how we deal with each other, because it feels that we have lost the ability to have true we're helping each other dialogue without feeling like there has to be a explicit winner and loser in each transaction. And that's part of what my company rebels against, particularly in the sales arena. And I just look at this, and I was having this conversation earlier, which started all this. My job shouldn't exist. Like, everyone should know how to just basically be nice and how to get along and communicate with each other. We all have these skills intellectually. Like, I know how to talk to you, you know how to talk to me, we know how to listen. And it just seems mind-boggling in so many ways. And Father, I apologize. I might have just split this whole thing open and lost the continuity of the episode. And I apologize if I did that for everyone out there. But hopefully you were able to follow the thread of what I'm trying to say here, is that we need to be grounded in something, but we also need to be able to recognize that the thing we might have just grounded ourselves in was temporary, and we need to get out of it. And this, all I'm trying to keep in line with the context of, in relationships, we can look back and say, hey, that was a bad idea to be with that person for that long. This was not productive for us. It was a bad idea to stay in that job with that bad of a boss, or whatever the case may be. But our tactics of learning how are not always good. Just as you said before, not always paying attention when I'm driving. Well, most people would say that's a very bad thing. But as we were talking about in our episode before, the machines have to discount over 99% of the input they get anyway. And I just marvel at the fact that we're able to advance in some capacity when we're literally overloaded by that degree. And Father, to try to bring some semblance of this episode home and make it come full circle here, is if you can hit upon, as you've been a priest, you've been advising people your professional life, essentially. You've seen people when they've gotten themselves into problems. How you can teach people how to say, hey, recognize what was wrong. How do we recognize that? And then how do we make it better? Starting primarily from a personal relationship standpoint.
Well, you put a few different things there together, and
Sorry about
you
that.
reminded me. That's okay. You reminded me one of the places that we came from in the previous episode, which does combine some of these things pretty well. That in order to forge into new territory and make new relationships, and in the context of diversity, for example, where I'm maybe learning a new language, a new culture, where I'm moving into a new field, forging relationships in new spaces. Um, maybe it's ecumenical dialogue, or maybe it's developing new business partners in a new realm. That we do that from the perspective of our identity, which is grounded in a group. So, to be an American, or to be a Catholic, to be in the homeowners association, or to be a member of the Knights of Columbus or something, to have an identity that's developed from a group and is stabilized in that way, that helps to stabilize our identity, stabilize our person, and then we can handle the chaos that we encounter, because it feels like chaos to us, for uh, whatever somebody who's, I'm trying to pick somebody, and I don't want to I don't want it to come off the wrong way, but for I don't know, somebody in theater or something, which is kind of a mystery to me, people who are on stage and all of that. If I wandered into that realm, it would feel like chaos to me. I don't know what's going on and where everything's happening, and that can be a cause of a lot of problems for me. I don't know how to interact in the culture of this group. Uh, but I'm going to enter into that as a Catholic, as a priest, as a person with my own background, and I'm going to try and make connections. And so, being grounded in our own identity and in our own groups is really important for pushing into the chaos of things that are unfamiliar to us. Learning moves from the known to the unknown, and in order to grow out into those spaces, then I need to have solidified relationships, committed relationships that I can depend on. And so I think that kind of brings together a couple of threads that you were mentioning, and then also that question about how do you help people. I mean, when I'm meeting with people, this is in some way what I'm doing. I'm developing secure attachment so that the person feels like they have a strong connection with me as a priest, as a spiritual father. I'm solidifying their relationship with with God in doing that, in the church in some ways, and that's solidifying their identity. And that gives the firm foundation on which they can then handle the problems, difficulties, conflicts, new territory, chaotic experiences, and everything else that we face in life on a daily basis. And so that's one of the ways that I would approach that. And that's again that kind of combination of the conservative being grounded in an identity and a group and certain practices and something dependable and something stable, something that feels familiar, comfortable, and then from that place of stability to be able to push into new territory that feels maybe difficult, chaotic, new, uncertain, leaves us feeling more vulnerable.
Yes, and I guess that's something to think about going into next week here is how we can shore up our stability so we can be someone that someone else can grab a hold of and build those stable relationships as you're doing for so many people out there, Father. And as you clearly did in this episode, as I felt like I'm rolling around in a hurricane and just spinning all over the place. I appreciate you being able to be with me in my head to make all this greatness happen. So we'll be with everyone again here next week, and we'll see you then.